stabilization is a family of techniques used to reduce blur associated with the motion of the camera.
Optical image stabilization, or OIS if you happen to be into the whole brevity thing. Now, many phones offered today, such as the iPhone 6 Plus, are touting OIS as the next great thing in cell phone camera technology, and, well, it's not exactly new. And this form of stabilization has been readily available in ordinary cameras for some years now. But it's not all marketing fluff and unnecessary fanfare either, because what makes it special is not how new the idea is, but how small and efficient these systems have become. Now, in the past, the only image stabilization readily offered on cell phone cameras was that of the digital variety, which worked all right for minimizing that annoying bobbing effect in video footage, but did squat in the way of reducing shakiness or motion blur that is caused by camera movement. And this is where optical image stabilizers come in. They help to produce higher quality images by reacting to stimulus in real time, ensuring that the path between the lens and the sensor is perfectly aligned before the subject is captured, thus allowing you, the user, or an end software to more easily focus the image. So to accomplish this, manufacturers utilize highly sensitive gyroscopic sensors in any range of 2 to many, which provide data as to the angle and movement of the camera, and some even exist specifically to provide extra functionality, such as improved vertical stability while taking panoramic shots. These directional sensors work in combination with tiny electromagnets that affect the angle of either the lens or the image sensor, depending on the type of OIS employed. So the first type we'll be looking at, lens-based applications, are found in high-end cameras and work by affecting the axis of the lens in response to movement, keeping the image tracked on the sensor as squarely as possible. The main advantage to this style is that the image seen by the user is as stable and clear as possible, but it fails in applications where no distance can be created between the lens and the sensor, so you're pretty much hooped if you want to jam this kind of...
Controlled depth of the field refers to how much it is focused in front and behind the subject that is focused upon.
But it's a very important subject, depth of field. So I first wanted to talk a little bit about what is depth of field, then why is it important, and how do you control it. So depth of field is pretty much what is most in focus in your image. You're going to focus on some point in your image, but then more than that is in focus. Some of it will be in focus in front of your image and some behind of it, typically 1/3 in front, 2/3 behind, and that's called the circle of confusion, I believe. So now that we kind of know what it is, why is it important? Well, depth of field is really important to give your photos kind of the professional look. I mean, if you have a really shallow depth of field, you can focus right on the eyes and the background will fade completely away. It'll blur out into what is called bokeh. Even if the background is messy or dirty or whatever, it's not attractive. By having a shallow depth of field, you just make it go away. You bring total focus of your shot to whatever you're attempting to bring focus to, which is typically the person's face or their eyes. And inversely, if you're doing a huge landscape shot, you want everything in focus. So you want a very wide depth of field. You want from the highest peak to the bush in front of you in focus. So you'd use a hyperfocal distance, focus somewhere in the middle, and then use depth of field to encompass the entire picture. And now how do you control it? We're going to use aperture. You take one test shot at f8, one test shot at 2.8. You'll be able to see the difference. All right, there you'll be able to see f8. And the depth of field is not very shallow. You can pretty much make out what's in the background, the walls, some trees, plants, whatever. So now we'll switch it to 2.8, and that should make the background fade out a bit more. And sure enough, the background is now pretty indiscernible. You can't really tell what's going on. You can tell there's stuff back there, but your eye is now not drawn to that at all, really. Your focus is now drawn to whatever you're actually focusing on. And for experiment number 2, we're going to zoom the lens, so effectively changing the millimeter focal length. We'll start at 70 f8, and then we'll go 200 f8. And you should be able to see the difference. The framing will change, but just try to keep it on the background. Okay, there's our baseline again at f8, 70 millimeters. And there's f8 at 200 millimeters, same distance. So you can tell the background is completely different. It's basically gone completely blurred out, which is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And the depth of field on the plant itself is now extremely shallow, even though we're at f8. So now...
F-stop, a camera setting corresponding to a particular F number.
But sometimes you'll see the iris referred to, and it's just good to know that we're just interested in the aperture. So the effect of this is that with an aperture open wide, you're going to be letting in a lot of light into your camera through the lens. But with a small aperture, you're not really going to be letting in that much light. The f-stop numbers are basically a scale of numbers for talking about how much light we want coming into the camera with regard to how wide open the aperture needs to be to get that amount of light. With the f-stop scale of numbers, every major point on the scale either doubles or halves the amount of light, depending if you're going up or down the scale. So if we have these different aperture sizes here, every time we go to the next aperture size, we're doubling the amount of light. But we need to pay attention to one interesting thing here about the size of the aperture. Let's use this one for example and say it's got a diameter of 20 millimeters. That means the area of the aperture is 314 millimeters. This is important because basically the area of the aperture is saying this is how much light we're letting through this aperture. So if we go up to the next size aperture in the f-stop scale, we're doubling the area of the aperture, which means we're saying we're letting in double the amount of light into this aperture. But what about the diameter of the aperture? Is that doubling too? No, it turns out in order to double the area of the aperture, we need to multiply the diameter of the aperture by the square root of 2. This will end up doubling the area of the aperture. So then if we want to go up to the next aperture size, we're going to double the area again, because this is going to let in, again, double the amount of light as the previous aperture size. So again, in order to double the area, we're going to need to take the diameter size and multiply it by the square root of 2. And now we're going to have a diameter of 40 millimeters. So this number, the square root of 2, this is an important number because every time we multiply the diameter by the square root of 2, we're doubling the amount of light. Just the same if we're to do the opposite and divide the diameter by the square root of 2, we're going to get half the amount of light. So remember what I mentioned before, that the f-stop scale is a way to talk about the amount of light coming in with regard to the size of the aperture. So why don't we just make a scale of aperture sizes and say, oh, well, if you want to let in, a certain amount of light, just open up your aperture to 40 millimeters. Well, the reason is that not all lenses are the same, and this same aperture size is going to let in different amounts of light depending on the lens you use. I'll show you why. So here we have two different setups with two different
lens, a piece of glass or a transparent substance with curved sides for concentrating or disappearing light rays.
Hello, my name is Simon Cade. This is DSLR Guide. So yeah, today I'm basically going to just talk you through what a good set of lenses would be, what's good for your first lens, and kind of talk you through a little bit about lenses generally, which ones work best for video, and talking about price and all the other factors that come into which lens to get, because it's a pretty big question and there's a very vast selection. So the first lens that I recommend you get, as many people tell you, is a standard zoom. So this is where if you have a crop sensor camera, the kit lens is a pretty good place to start out, but bear in mind it's at f4 to 5.6, which means that it's not great in low light. All my lenses are f2.8 all the way across the zoom, which is really great because the majority of the time I do shoot at 2.8, and to have that extra light is just really helpful. But obviously that does come at a cost. So my recommendations are, if you're pretty low on money, if you're getting a low-end camera like a 550D, 600D, then I would definitely recommend that you get the kit lens. If you're just starting out and you're looking into, not sure whether you're going to continue in filmmaking or not. So yeah, the kit lens, it has a nice zoom range from 18 to 55. That's pretty much perfect for a general walk-around lens. But In terms of sharpness, it's
Angle of view, the angle in a lens between the line drawn from opposite edges of the image to the second point of the lens.
Mark Wallace.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's show. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, this week we're going to be talking about something that's a great tool to help you get out of sticky situations. In other words, when you're trying to take a picture and you have a really cluttered background, here's something that you can use to really make a great photo. Well, let's start by looking at our question. This one comes from Travis Fisher, and Travis asked, could you explain angle of view? Well, absolutely. Angle of view is simply how much our lens can see. A wide-angle lens has a wider angle of view. This means we'll see a lot more with our lens, which is great for scenic and travel photos, photojournalism, and all kinds of photos. But it also means that if we're shooting a portrait, we'll see much more of the background, and that's not always a good thing. Now, longer lenses have a narrower angle of view, which means we'll capture less of the background, and that's great when we really want to isolate a subject and keep our image clean and uncluttered.
Microfocus, a setting on a digital camera that enables users to focus on subjects close to the camera lens. Zoom ratio determine how much or how little of the scene you are photographing will appear in the final photograph.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. But that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy, actually a Photography 101 episode. And I've got my glasses on a little crooked so they don't reflect quite so much into the monitor. So I don't know, they look kind of goofy, I know, but hopefully that will look a little bit better so you don't just see these big reflections. Well, today I'm going to talk about some concepts that really confused me when I was starting out in photography. So, like most people, I took pictures even as a young kid, but sometime in the late 1990s, people around me started to say, wow, you really take nice pictures. And I have to tell you that my picture styling really improved by taking more pictures and just trying to think a little bit more about the composition of what I was taking. And I really had very, very poor understanding of the mechanics of cameras and how I could use that understanding of how cameras worked to take pictures. And so like most people, I started out with compact cameras because that's really what was available in those days. And I still use compact cameras all the time. And they had a thing on them called the time zoom. So this little Sony, which is a favorite in our family, it's a couple years old, he has a 4-time zoom. And I would have to tell you that I really did not understand what that meant. I thought it magnified things 4 times because things would get bigger when you would zoom out. But that's not what it means. And in fact, when I bought my first DSLR in 2003, there was a Canon Digital Rebel It didn't talk about time zoom at all. It talked about the lens that was like so many millimeters. And I thought, millimeters? Why can't they just tell me the time zoom? That's some zoomable lens. How big is that range? Is it just a very small range that it can zoom through, or is it a larger range? And so lenses that have very large zoom ratios are great travel lenses, because it's sort of like packing a bunch of lenses in your bag with just taking one lens. So
a follow focus is a focus control mechanism used in filmmaking with film cameras and in television production with professional video cameras.
Welcome to Creative Cow's DSLR podcast. I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Rich Harrington.
Rich, after a certain amount of experience with using DSLR cameras and trying to get critical focus with them by just using the focus ring on a lens, you're probably going to get frustrated pretty quickly, yeah?
Yeah, the thing that a lot of people have to realize is that modern photography lenses are designed to very quickly autofocus when shooting stills. So the focus ring, only is like a quarter turn for the entire range.
Right.
And so as you're going through it, it takes a long time to find focus. So there we're zooming, but a real quick turn there, it's not a lot of movement.
Right.
And so that gets really difficult. You're like, oh, out.
Yeah, and if you ever listen to your camera when you're shooting stills, it's such minute, precise adjustments that when you start shooting video with these cameras, it's very difficult when you're using your hand on the lens to get that.
You'll find it, but it's a lot of vibration, a lot of movement, and sometimes even sound as you just sort of keep cranking past.
Absolutely. And then the other thing about that is that, over time, you're going to find it very difficult to get repeatable focus. If you're shooting a narrative piece and somebody's walking into the room, it's very difficult to do that by hand. So enter into the world of follow focuses.
Yep, a very traditional tool for the film industry.
Absolutely. So a follow focus is made up of a couple parts. Here's an actual follow focus unit, right? So it has a wheel here and a gearbox. And on this guy right here, I have attached it to a rod system. But then on the actual lens, there's gears that are used. And these gears, can come in different sizes and formats and stuff like that.
There's magnetic gears that you just click into place. There's here. As he can go through, how it's really easy to find that. So if he was dealing with a moving subject trying to hit their mark, it'd be pretty simple. Basically, what would happen is that he would set the focus in one position, and then you take like a dry erase marker and just put a little mark right on the ring, near the mark.
Right there.
And then he would move the focus to the next position, and you'd add a second mark. And what would just happen is as your talent moved through the scene, you would just be watching them and turning and hitting those marks as they step to each major mark on the set.
Yeah, and there's different implementations of this, of these rings. Obviously, if you're running the camera, it can be a little difficult to see over there, right? So, in the motion picture industry, there's people's job. That's all they do is that they're a focus puller.
And if they do it badly, they don't have a job very long.
And so most of these follow focuses that are available and will work with DSLR cameras also have support for industry standard whips, right? So you can actually just put a little whip into the follow focus, and then somebody a couple feet away, or when you do decide to step up to a follow focus, it really does open up a whole new world of not just creative possibilities, but also getting better images because your hand's not on the camera and so on and so forth.
Well, there you go. Give a follow focus a try. You can rent these or find someone who has one. See if it impacts your shooting style positively. My name's Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
And thanks for checking us out.